Hello my kings, queens, and fellow binary leaders, and welcome back to the Nekoma. Today we're going to get started with a one-shot. It's a SakuAtsuIwaOi one-shot, which as you all know is not a standard published ship, but it has been requested and my channel members decided that this one should be next. Sorry, my baby bird is saying hello in the background. This is, however, also a fanfic, and I don't want you to underestimate the content warnings, so please check them out. They will show up on screen in a second, but they're also in the video description. If you can't watch this video or you simply don't want to, that is perfectly valid. I hope to see you again on another video, and now let's go. I love you. It was only 3 words, a sentiment they shared on a daily basis, and yet Atsumu was torn from his poor imitation of sleep, and as he saw the message, his stomach turned. Suddenly, his heart started racing, and he rushed to open their chat to see if there was more. Perhaps Todo had sent it already hours ago, and due to some technical issue it only reached him now, but no. Sent at 3:12 a.m. He tried to calm himself, reasoning that he still felt sluggish. Nightmares had haunted what little sleep he had gotten, so of course he'd assumed the worst in his anxiety-riddled state. His fingers rushed to type an answer, trying to make it sound casual as he asked why Oikawa was still awake. Given their stressful lives, heightened by the demands of their jobs, they weren't living together at the moment, so he couldn't simply check on him. As the seconds ticked by, he grew more and more anxious. The setter admitted defeat in his battle for even an ounce of sleep and got up. He started pacing up and down the room, refreshing the chat repeatedly, but nothing came. A glimpse of hope ignited inside him as he saw that he read it, but in the absence of a reply, he only felt his heart plummeting further. Now it wasn't simply a thoughtless message anymore. There could have been a misunderstanding. No, this was intentional. For a few seconds he couldn't move. Cold dread settled in his stomach, and the potentially devastating realization seeped through his consciousness into his muscles and bones, paralyzing him. His hands were shaking as he clicked on Oikawa's contact to call him. He anxiously waited for any sound other than the beeping that indicated his call hadn't been accepted yet, while he clumsily threw on his sweatpants. The call didn't connect. He tried again. His panicked attempts to remind himself that Oikawa wasn't him, that there was no reason to assume the worst, were cut off when the call was denied. That's it. Atsumu stumbled to his front door, uncaring about the time or how much noise he was making. His anxiety had him in a chokehold. No matter what the reason, he wouldn't be able to calm until he had assured himself of his partner's well-being. With clumsy steps, cursing as he stumbled repeatedly in his rushed, sleep-drunken state, he made it to the Genkan and put on his shoes. He had thrown on a hoodie, but didn't bother with the jacket. He didn't care much for being quiet as he stumbled down the stairs of his apartment building and out the front door while fumbling with his phone. A frustrated huff escaped his throat, laced with the growing underlying panic he couldn't seem to shake. The red bar of the battery symbol in the upper right corner of his screen reminded him unhelpfully that he had forgotten to charge the device. Still, enough energy remained to open Snapchat and see if Oikawa had left his location on. Immediately, he tried to commit the information to memory and started running. The cool night air burned his lungs, but other than that, he barely felt it. His body was running high on adrenaline. He stole rushed glances from the map on his phone for as long as the battery would allow it, to make sure he was on the right path, only for it to give out soon after. Fucking hell! Why now? He stuffed it into the pocket of his hoodie forcefully, scanning the area nervously. He couldn't be far from it anymore. For the first time since leaving the house, Atsumu truly took notice of his surroundings. He had reached a quieter part of Osaka, with many apartment buildings and small houses lining the streets. Above him hung the carefully arranged web of cables, almost imperceptible against the dark night sky, though compared to Hyogo it seemed almost bright, yet with much less stars. Even in this almost residential area, the light pollution of the city was far-reaching, something that, for just a moment, he learned to appreciate as he finally recognized the silhouette of someone sitting on the railing of a bridge connecting over a narrow river. As he approached slowly, the traffic light on the other side of the road illuminated the brunette's saddest features, getting caught in his eyes, which were trained firmly on something in the distance. He looked stunning, but there was something in his posture, his face, that made Atsumu's chest tighten with worry. Something painfully familiar. For a moment it stole his breath away and tightened around his throat like a wire. Coming here was pure impulse, a gut feeling formed by recognizing his own destructive tendencies in the other, but he had never considered if he had been equipped to deal with what he'd find. He gulped and buried his fists in his pockets next to his useless phone. With slow steps he approached the other tentatively, but didn't say a word, just sat down beside him. The bridge wasn't high. Not high enough to get fatally injured. Break an ankle, maybe, a leg if he were creative about it. It took him off guard for a moment. Had he overreacted? A glance to the side, Oikawa's face now illuminated red, then green again, proved that he didn't. He paused, waited. For a moment he just copied the other in staring off into the distance. It was nice. An odd sense of clarity and serenity washed over him as he observed the overgrown riverbed and the speckled light reflections where spots of water peeked through. He took in a deep breath of the cold air surrounding them and waited. His boyfriend hadn't reacted to him so far, and he started to believe he would lose the feeling in his toes and fingers by the time he did, when a sudden pressure on his right hand made an almost painful wave surge through him. It wasn't much, but the impact was immediate. His shoulders relaxed a little and he interlocked their pinky fingers. I'm sorry. Atsumu shook his head, still looking into the distance as he knew Oikawa was. He took a deep breath, testing the tight feeling that had assembled in his throat, and was surprised by himself with how steady he managed to make his voice sound. Did you have a plan? The other paused and gave a barely noticeable shake of his head. Not really. Despite that, his other hand reached into his sweater pocket and pulled out a pill bottle. Without hesitation, he handed it to Atsumu, who, while stunned, swiftly took it and hid it in his own pocket. He didn't wait to check the label. I don't think I meant to use them, just took them with me, just in case. Atsumu did know, and he nodded again. The plastic of the bottle felt like it burned his skin. It reminded him of a time his brother wouldn't permit him to have any painkillers or sleep medication, even mild ones, in his own space. If he needed any, Atsumu would provide him with just the right dosage. Now they weighed his pocket down heavily. It felt 10 times worse that they weren't his own. Was the text? Was it also just in case? Oikawa nodded, slumping over a bit. I didn't write your letters. You deserve better than a wordless goodbye. You deserve to know that you're loved, as are you. Something doubtful flickered in the taller's eyes. He still didn't look at him. Atsumu tugged at his hand, now taking it fully in his. I love you, Toru. He didn't say more. There was little more to be said. Not now. He knew days on which only time and action can heal the space, and he'd make sure Oikawa has as much of that as he needed. They sat in silence on the railing, observing the river below. The night was clear, if cold. Their breaths formed small clouds as their noses turned red and fingers cold. After a while, Oikawa let himself fall against Atsumu's shoulder. The blonde felt him quiver as tears began to fall. He would have pulled him closer and slung an arm around him hadn't the other trapped his hand in an iron grip. He didn't mind. Whatever Oikawa needed at the moment, he'd be there and provide it for him. His thumb gently caressed the back of Oikawa's hand. He had beautiful long fingers, with slight calluses befitting for a satyr of his league. Everything about him was perfect and gorgeous, even if he was blind to it, like a butterfly to the beauty of its own wings. Atsumu had rarely, even in the competitive field that professional volleyball was, met someone as hardworking and passionate as the satyr sitting beside him now. Everyone who played with or against him now had earned their place and poured blood, sweat, and tears into the sport, but it was those like Hinata and Oikawa that defied all odds of talent and stature that were true inspirations to him. He inclined his head to the side, no longer watching the rising sun ahead, but its reflection on Oikawa's eyes, like a fire being lit anew by the first light of a new day. It was then that Atsumu knew he hadn't given up. The pressure was getting to him, and maybe he wished for a break desperately, but he was still fighting. With a subtle sigh of relief, he pressed a kiss to his hair and returned to stay by his side until Oikawa was ready to leave. The gold setting the sky ablaze breathed life back into them as they waited for its rays to warm their skin. It was late in the morning when they found themselves walking hand in hand back home to Atsumu's apartment building, thoroughly chilled by the cold night air but alive, and for now at least, well. Atsumu could breathe a little bit better, feeling the faint echo of Oikawa's pulse in the veins in his hand while gripping it tightly. Neither of them had brought a jacket, so the contrast when stepping inside was startling. Not nearly as much as the sudden clatter of something falling in the kitchen. They hadn't even taken their shoes off yet when a very startled Sakusa appeared in the doorframe. He looked paler than usual, the contrast exacerbated by the bags under his eyes, which were red-rimmed. Hajime? His voice was shaking as he called out to the trainer, who appeared mere seconds after, looking very stressed and more tense than even on the most difficult games. What? Has Atsumu finally... He interrupted himself at the sight of them, cursed under his breath and crossed the distance between them and pulled them both into a bone-crushing hug. Atsumu let out a quiet shriek. His bones felt almost brittle after so long in the cold, and he wasn't sure they'd withstand Iwazumi's smothering much longer. Luckily, the trainer pulled back shortly after. His eyes zeroed in on Oikawa with a furious worry conning his face. Where in the hell have you been? What were you thinking leaving in the middle of the night? That message... Toru... His voice grew thin. Sakusa in the background nervously fumbled with the dish rack. Atsumu only noticed now, as well as the redness on his hands. His heart clenched. I'm sorry, Hajime. Kiyomi... I'm really... A soft gasp escaped his throat as Iwazumi's arms crushed him anew. Yet his arms lifted hesitantly to reciprocate the gesture. Idiot. I don't care. I was so worried. I thought the worst. Waking up to nothing more than that I couldn't reach you. Idiot. I'm sorry. I turned off my phone. I'm sorry. Iwazumi shook his head against Oikawa's shoulder as tears streaked his face. Don't apologize. Never apologize. Just wake me up next time. I don't care why or when, just... They remained like this, as if frozen in time for a minute. Atsumu carefully walked past them to meet Kiyomi halfway. He gently weighed the spiker's hands in his, only for the black hair to recoil slightly. Sorry. You're freezing. And Sakusa's voice rang shock, and he quickly grabbed Atsumu's hands again before feeling his forehead and letting his hand rest against his cheek. Then his eyes flickered to Oikawa, noticing the same redness on his face and hint of blue painting his lips. His jaw set tightly. He looked upset but not angry, more like he was still riddled with worry for them.
Inside, quick. Change into some fresh clothes and huddle up in some blankets. You need to warm up again.
Atsumu gave a small smile before he nodded. He placed a tender kiss on Kiyomi's cheek before taking off to his bedroom. Come on, Toto. You can borrow some of my Atsumu was quick to get changed. He watched as Toto's hands trembled when he pulled the hoodie the blonde gave him over his head. He watched as his head hung low, skin pale and still cold from the freezing winds that had embraced them throughout the night, staying by his side when no one did. Toto. I will give these to Omi. It's better if neither of us has them. He tried for a smile, but it fell quickly as he saw the warm brown eyes now glistening with tears. They captivated him, held him in place while the seconds ticked by. Then the toddler nodded and turned away again. Atsumu took in a shuddered breath. A deep, resonating ache remained in his chest, an urge to flee as fast as his legs would allow, while a thin metal wire seemed to bind him to the other almost painfully. His steps, when he turned to the door, were hesitant. He turned back around to drape a blanket over the other before proceeding. Oikawa looked up at him. He looked broken, but this time Atsumu smiled and wavered as he placed a last kiss on his forehead before turning around again. Silently, he urged him to understand that no matter what, he'd always find him, even in the darkest winter. Omi? Atsumu flinched as he closed the door and to his surprise was immediately met with Iwaizumi. His racing heart calmed a little as he let out a nervous chuckle and held onto the other's arms for support. Don't scare me like that, Hajime. He tried sounding light-hearted in his scolding, but Iwaizumi remained serious. His eyes flickered to the door nervously. How is he? Atsumu gulped, straightening his back and subconsciously crossing his arms over his chest. Better, I think. Better than last night. Just be gentle. Iwaizumi nodded slowly, visibly tense. Once more, it felt like the air between them was thinning, like no matter how deep he breathed in, it wasn't enough. All this time, he never realized fully how awful it felt to be on the other side. He had an inkling, of course. Hated to cause anyone to worry, or worse, hurt. He always tried to keep it hidden for that very reason, fought it less for his own sake and more theirs. Suddenly, he was pulled into a tight embrace. The heat burned him after being thoroughly chilled outside, but it felt good, grounding. Thank you. Thank you for being there for him. Thank you for saving him. It struck him like lightning, and he had trouble keeping his voice from thinning, his heart from racing, and his tears from falling. I didn't. He wouldn't have. He wouldn't. He said himself it was just in case. He wouldn't. It would be so much worse if he seriously considered. The arms around him tightened as he fought the images in his mind. He couldn't accept what Iwaizumi was implying. He couldn't. He tried taking deep breaths, forbidding the tears to fall, and carefully separated them. This time, he didn't try for a smile, feeling as though any movement on his face would shatter the facade he poured so much into maintaining. He didn't want to shatter. Not now. He gave a nod for the trainer to pass and look after their boyfriend, avoiding eye contact. As soon as Iwaizumi passed him, he took it as a signal to move too. Mechanically, he walked into the kitchen and found Sakusa warming up some tea. The ace's head snapped around as soon as he heard his steps approaching. The worry was painfully obvious etched into his face. Hey, Omi. He did it. He messed up. He tried to smile. As soon as the corners of his mouth lifted, tears pulled in the corners of his eyes and began streaming down bit by bit over his face. Immediately, Kiyomi stopped what he was doing and rushed over to him. He paused before him, his eyes widened. Could you just keep these somewhere safe? His hands were shaking violently as he handed him the pills. Sakusa stared at them for a heartbeat before rushing to make them disappear from his view. Atsumu didn't even fully process what he did with them, just that one moment he and the bottle were there. Then both were gone before he returned without it.
Atsumu.
His voice was gentle, his touch soft but firm as he guided them to sit down on the couch. The weight of a blanket was draped over his shoulders, and warm, careful fingers wiped away the tears from his face before cupping his cheek.
Were they yours?
He shook his head slowly. Sakusa nodded and gulped.
Okay. I'm here for you. Always.
This time, Atsumu tried to shake his head. He wasn't the one who needed help right now. He shouldn't be the one who needed help right now. But Sakusa shushed him. He sat down beside him and coaxed him to rest against his shoulder. His touch felt like balm on his skin as he soothed him gently. From the corner of his eye, he caught Kiyomi's worried glances towards his bedroom. They waited tensely for Todo and Hajime to join them again. When they did, Todo looked even more disheveled than before. His eyes tired but now red-rimmed as if he had cried. It filled Atsumu with a hint of relief at the absence of the previous apathy. Kiyomi next to him, however, tensed and looked like he was restraining himself from reaching out to beside her. Oikawa glanced at them hesitantly, his eyes widening a bit as they fell on the evidence of Atsumu's own tears before quickly turning away again. Hajime, however, nudged him gently, and without a word, he snuggled up to Atsumu's side and hid his face against his neck. I'm sorry. Atsumu shook his head weakly and pulled him closer. Soon, Todo was trapped in an embrace between him and Kiyomi, who looked like he'd be content staying like this indefinitely. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I hope maybe some of you feel a little bit more seen now. I have to say, I'm really proud of this one. I feel just like my voice didn't give out on me this time, and everything from the music to the writing came just together beautifully. Shows again that great art just comes from pain, doesn't it? No, but you guys don't have to worry about me. I know some of you tend to do that after fanfic. I process a lot of these feelings through fanfic, and it does help me. I hope it does help you. A special thanks as always goes out to my nanny neckers who decided that this should have been the next video. They also got early access, and if that sounds interesting to you, please check out the join button under this video. And to all of you, please hold out if you feel like this and wait for the next morning, the next light, the light of a new day. It can bring some good perspective, and you all are so appreciated. I love you guys so much. Check out my content, and now have a very amazing day. Bye everyone.
Today's gonna be a good day. Wake up. Today's gonna be a good day. Wake up. Today's gonna be a good day. Wake up. Today's gonna be a good day.